the discussions today and will introduce you to our excellent panel of speakers shortly. So why are we discussing this issue today? Tackling domestic violence has been a long-standing concern for WI. Throughout our history, in fact, the WI has campaigned to make sure that women and girls can live the lives they choose, free from fear of abuse. The WI campaigned for the funding of refuges in every county in 1975 to make sure that domestic violence survivors were able to access justice through the courts in 1988 and to adequately define domestic violence under the law in 1993. I know that many of you will have taken part already in the last few days in the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence, which started on the 25th of November. Like every year, it has been inspiring to see so many WI members and their families get involved by raising awareness, supporting their local refuges, and engaging with decision makers. While we know there has been much progress on this agenda, unfortunately, the statistics speak for themselves when we consider the challenges we still face. The tragic events of this past year once again remind us all of the urgent need to make our world safe for women. Women have the right to live a life free from violence. We are renewing our call for an end to violence against women and girls. Now is the time for action. We need a whole system response, including concrete action from government, the police, and in legislation. Support services must have the funding and resources they need. Only through a holistic approach can we achieve women's liberation from the fear of violence once and for all. Therefore, today is an opportunity to gain a better understanding of the issue and learn more about the role men can play in ending violence against women. I'll now hand over to Nikki to introduce our panel of speakers. Nikki.
Good afternoon and thank you, Anne. I'm Nikki Amos. I'm Chair of the Public Affairs Committee at the WI. I'm delighted to be here today to chair the Supporting Survivors webinar and to introduce our excellent speakers. This is a webinar, so unlike a Zoom call, you will not see yourself on the screen. I do know this can be a bit disconcerting. Behind the scenes today, I am joined by Anchal Mann and Tobias Arno from the NFWI Public Affairs Department. If you are having any technology problems, do not suffer in silence. Either put a note in the chat or email the NFWI office and they will help you sort it out. The webinar is scheduled to last an hour and we have not allowed for a break. So please feel free to get up and make a cup of coffee should you need one. It is December. Some of the country still has no power. It's only 2 weeks till Christmas and we are all very stretched. So I'm extremely pleased to be able to introduce 3 such excellent speakers for this webinar. We'll begin by hearing from Commander Sue Williams from the Metropolitan Police. Sue has over 40 years policing experience and was awarded the Queen's Police Medal in 2017. She has experience both as a uniformed and detective officer. Commander Sue will be taking us through what more can be done by the police to make our streets safer for women. We will then hear from Anthea Sully, Chief Executive of White Ribbon UK, a fantastic organisation whose mission is to end male violence against women. Our Wales office, NFWI Wales, have worked extensively with White Ribbon UK, who work with men and boys to challenge those male cultures that lead to harassment and abuse. Finally, we will hear from Dr. Stephen Burrell, Deputy Director at the Centre for Research into Violence and Abuse, an Assistant Lecturer at Durham University. Dr. Stephen's research has focused on investigating work with men and boys to prevent men's violence against women. After our three speakers, there will be a 15-minute question and answer session. If you want to ask a question during the Q&A, please type your question into the Q&A box, which is at the bottom of your screen. Without further ado, I would like to hand over to Commander Sue Williams to talk about the work that the Met Police are doing in this field. Thank you, Sue. I think you're mute. I think you're mute, Sue.
Yep, you should be able to hear me now.
Yes.
So, good afternoon, everyone. I'm delighted that you've asked me to speak here this afternoon. You've heard a little bit about my role. I'm a commander in the Metropolitan Police Service. I was head of profession for safeguarding, and I'm now head of profession for criminal justice. So I have a lot to do with victims, bringing offenders to justice as part of my role. And indeed, when I was part of safeguarding as well, the violence against women and girls and domestic abuse. I'm absolutely passionate about policing. I've stayed over my time because I think I can make a difference, and that's what I've been trying to do most of my career. But what I will say is it's not been a great year for the Metropolitan Police or police serving in general. We've had tragedies this year. Sarah Everard's murder, Sabrina Nessa, the sisters, Bibi Henry and Nicole Smallman. And they have exposed our vulnerabilities as a police service, and not just London, but England and Wales. But also they've exposed the vulnerabilities in other services and other communities about how we deal with violence against women and girls. And we've had a long, hard look at ourselves from the outside, as I know other organisations have as well. And we've looked at those areas where we can improve our services. And I talk about the 5 stages of grief, which I know many of you will have maybe encountered. So denial, anger, bargaining, depression and acceptance. And the way that I see that in what's happened this year is, as a police service, I think we completely denied that there was anything wrong, that we had any problems inside our own ranks. I'm not saying we thought it was hunky-dory, because we know that things go on all the time, but we didn't realise the level of issues that were quite apparent now when all this came up. I then think we went into an anger stage where we were exceptionally angry about what had happened, particularly when police officers had abused their position and let us down. And then we went into that bargaining bit. Well, how do we make ourselves feel better? So we invited other organisations, come and have a look at us, do a review. Maybe you'll come up with some things, It was that kind of approach. And then I think we've reflected, and there's a huge sadness about what's happened. So internally, we're feeling really sad because we've let the community down, we've let our partners down, we've lost the trust and confidence out there. And now we're in that acceptance stage where we know what we have to do and we have to move on. So we've asked, there are a huge amount of scrutiny going on. Baroness cases coming in to look at our processes and procedures. We've got the Home Office review taking part after the Sarah Everard case. We've got the IOPC, Independent Office of Police Complaints, Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabularies coming in. We've got loads of inquests that put back issues for policing. But what I would say, this gives an opportunity for lots of people out externally to ask the questions of policing. Where are we going wrong? What could we do better? But it also gives us an opportunity as officers to say, well, actually, there is a side from us, there is a lot we're doing. We're not perfect. Not everybody gets it right, but there's a huge amount of work we're doing. Please acknowledge some of that work. And all this has been a completely bitter pill to take. But what's emerged is a whole understanding around violence against women and girls and domestic abuse, and it's a priority for policing, not just in the Met. That, I've got to say, close to my heart, because I have been involved in domestic abuse as the lead responsible officer in the Met, and then running safeguarding. And to hear, you will all know what the figures are that 35% of violence against persons are women, where women are victims. 25% of women are victims of domestic abuse. 2 women killed a week. Those are national statistics. 97% of women say they've experienced sexual harassment at some point. 96% have said that they don't report it. So that is a terrible position to be in when we don't have the confidence of the community to report those things. But what it is doing is allowing us to raise our standards, have an action plan around trust and confidence, and improve our personal responsibility. So our VAUG, Violence Against Women and Girls Action Plan, all the Met are signed up to that, every single officer in the Met, that we want to bring offenders to justice. We want to do more for victim care and reduce repeat victimisation. We want to improve the confidence in policing and confidence to report. And we want to tackle sexual misconduct in our workplace. So there are 4 themes that we talk about to our staff. One is to protect women and girls. So we've got new town centre patrols and around open space patrolling. We've got predatory offender units. We've invested in growth in these areas. We've got patrol with women patrols where we're going out patrolling with women. And we've invested a lot in our public protection. The second area is working with partners. So that's doing more crime prevention, safer spaces, identifying those or where there are not safer spaces, and doing more for victim care. The third part is bringing offenders to justice. So that's reducing our outstanding offenders, better evidence, making use of legislation like Section 28 for vulnerable victims, which means we can record them before they go to trial so they don't have that experience of being in the courtroom. We've invested more in forensics, digital forensics, and also in out-of-court disposal. So it's a better way of dealing for some victims. They don't want to go through the criminal justice system. They want the abuse to stop, or they want people to get education. And there are other ways in out-of-court disposals that we can make that happen for them. So we've also done, the fourth area was improving our culture and our standards. We have briefed every single officer in the Met about raising the standards and behaviour, about how they use social media, and not being a bystander. So it's not good enough to stand there and watch something happen and not report it, or even to see something on social media and not say that you've received it. So it brings me on to what men can do to support us. So I think there's a lot men can do to support women's rights. And when we had the Commissioner, Bernard Hogan-Howe, as it was several years ago, come down to a staff association meeting, we raised the issue of menopause. And I cannot tell you the horror on that man's face when we said menopause. He did not get it, didn't understand it, but he left the room understanding exactly what had to happen. And I did a talk for Barclays Bank around domestic abuse, mixed audience, mainly male managers, lots of women there. When I said menopause, the women, yeah, we get it, we understand it, it's preventing us from progressing. The men completely blank. But again, they found out more about it and they embraced it, and they're supporting their women through those areas. So it's often uncomfortable issues to raise, but we need to do that. We have a He for She campaign, which the Deputy Commissioner has been promoting, and every single operational command unit has champions. And also we're educating colleagues around their behaviour and their actions that they take. But I think education goes further than that. It's about educating communities, educating in schools and at home, treating our partners and children about what to say, and a zero tolerance around bad behaviour, banter, conversation. And we've all been to dinner parties where friends have used language or said things and we've not challenged them. That's our job. And it's the job of some of our male, whether it's partners, family, friends, to challenge that behaviour as well. And then I just wanted to talk a little bit about the He for She. It's a United Nations campaign around gender equality, speaking up and taking action against negative stereotypes and behaviour and gender in the workplace and improving those working conditions. And they do combat DA and sexual abuse in society. So that's why we have champions in every single operational command. And what I think men are pivotal to ending violence against women, and also for tackling some of the minimisation that women have of their role in society in the workplace. And I think what men can do is challenge that gender inequality, support women around violence against women and girls and domestic abuse, and make sure that they have everything they need, and particularly in the workplace, encourage progression and retention of women, identifying that talent, and supporting and mentoring colleagues so that we can get more women into senior positions, because they become the role models for the future generations. And then finally, what I want to say is I think men have an opportunity for making a safer working environment for all of us. So I think my time's up. So thank you very much for allowing me to put over what we've done in the Met and where I think men can play a part in this.
Thank you very much, Commander Sue. Are you able to stay with us to answer questions at the end?
Yes,
thank you. Thank you, Commander. Can I please ask Anthea to now present on the work of the White Ribbon UK?
Thank you very much, Nikki. Am I able to share a screen? Let's hope we didn't practice this. Let's hope this will work. I'm less used to doing. Are people able to see my screen? I can't see it, but oh yes, I can. Right. Hopefully that's
so,
right.
I think that's
it
fine.
is. Yes, it's because it's all white and there's a ribbon right in the back, in the bottom corner. So that's why I was so concerned. So thank you very much for inviting me today. And it's really great to be on the same platform as Sue and Stephen, who are both people who I know are passionately committed to working to end violence against women. So I'm going to just place on the screen some of the statistics, and we're not going to dwell on these, but it prompts the question, why do we need a white ribbon campaign? And I'm working for an organisation that would ultimately like not to exist. So we're the leading charity that's ending male violence against women by engaging with men and boys, and we're part of a global white ribbon movement. And it was founded 30 years ago, by some leading men in Canada, following a shocking murder by a gunman of 14 women at a university campus in Montreal. We would call that an incel murder now. And he particularly sought out women who were studying to be experts in fields that he saw as being things that should be dominated by men, such as engineering. So we work across communities, organisations, and across society as a whole, because we really want to change commonly held attitudes and behaviours that support and encourage the violence that you can see is represented in those statistics. And we're wanting to work in primary prevention. We want to stop these things happening before they start. And the only way to do that is to comprehensively work with men. So this is how we work. So we want to place men and boys at the forefront of preventing violence. I'm assuming it'll be mainly women on the call today. For so many years, not only we've been the people who've directly experienced violence, but we've also been people doing the heavy lifting in terms of wanting to make that change. So we want to really bring men into that equation and to take responsibility. I'm really glad that Sue emphasised how important gender equality is in terms of reducing violence. As an important aspect of the preventative work that we're wanting to do is that we're working towards a more gender equal society, and men need to understand that and be part of that. We work with a lot of organisations and recognise that workplace cultures are something that can be developed, made much more positive, more equal, and not only do they then transform the culture within the workplace, but also that has a very powerful impact on wider society. It's so important in engaging with men that we make sure that men are listening to and are accountable to women, and that this is a conversation. It's something we do have to watch, that we don't have a stop promoting a heroic type thing where men come in to save women. That is absolutely not what we're about. And part of all our work is to make sure that everybody knows where to get help. That's really important. We raise awareness of what is violence against women and girls. Sometimes that's the first time people understand that they may be directly experiencing this. It's definitely something that happens in terms of domestic abuse. Also, these things are always in the room, and I'm sure that when we're speaking, there'll be people who realise that they are perpetrators. So we need to signpost all these people to know where they can go to get help and support. So you'll be aware that that there was a hashtag as in the following the murder of Sarah Everard, not all men. We managed to get this one out before then, all men can, and it's really vital that I emphasize that we are looking at how men can make a positive difference, and all men can do this. So a PR company that was a sister one to the one that Sarah Everard worked for came to us and really wanted to engage with these themes, and produced a campaign for us in those days. And I still think the work that happened there was is really powerful. It was interesting for me working with a team that was men and women working together, and they were being influenced by each other and the conversations they were having, and being open and receptive to their to what each other were saying. So I don't know whether any of you caught any of these on the at this time, so sort of end of March. They produced these statements, which I'll take us through shortly, but they managed to get these on billboards and bus stops and many other places across the country, working really hard on getting the message that all men can make a difference, and how they could do that. So the intention was to be positive, and for a call to action for men to be involved. And I think the statements that they came through for this part of this campaign are things that are really helpful. We had people contacting us wanting a checklist, and what do I need to do? So for example, a check, and the press were also coming to this. So if you're a man, a thing you can do is you have your checklist, so you know you must cross the road when you're when a woman is on her own. And we wanted to go an extra level than that, because this is much more profound in terms of culture than having a checklist of how to behave. It requires much more self-reflection, I think, and making sure once again that there's an understanding and appreciation of women's experience. So these are our all men can statements, which you could see were on the boards, and we have used all this messaging again over the last days of action on White Ribbon Day. So so we can call out the smallest thing. One of the things that's really important is for men, when we're working with them, to understand that actually small actions are ones that cause harm to women. So telling a sexist joke creates a climate where a woman who is hearing that, that makes her feel vulnerable, causes fear that is long term. It's really vital when we talk about preventing extreme forms of violence, that actually those small things are also harmful, but can lead to the more extreme violence. I won't read through all those because you've probably read them all ahead, but I think for me, really want to pull out, we can stop thinking there's nothing we can do. We don't need to accept the statistics that we experience. Change is possible, and we can learn that not being violent is not enough. This needs an extra step into taking action. So hopefully this is familiar with you. We call on all men to make the white ribbon promise to never commit, excuse, or remain silent about men's violence against women. We always have to challenge the never commit, because it's easy to once again go to, well, it's not me, I would never dream of doing X, Y, Z. We want to make sure that men are really thinking about the small things that they do that actually may lead to that fear of violence. And then not to excuse it, not to join in and participate in telling jokes, catcalling, not to excuse those kinds of activities, and not to remain silent. So call it out, and we work with ways that that can happen. So just some examples of that we're looking for all men indeed, and here's some examples of all men who have stood up, made the White Ribbon Promise, and wanted to get involved in this campaign. I'm sad there's not a police photograph on there. I don't think there was on the top corner, because we work closely with several police forces, and I'll come on to that in terms of organisations being involved. We work with many different organisations, and police, following on from Sue, are a really important part of that, and really thinking of both culture within the police service, and also how that can work out in wider society and communities. Indeed, we've got a shared meeting of all the police that are involved, either White Ribbon accredited or becoming White Ribbon accredited, next week, because we want to talk about how we can even more effectively support that culture change, which is so challenging. So it's once again a very large group of people who are organisations who are involved in our accreditation programmes. Some smaller organisations are supporters. That's an incredibly diverse group of organisations, and also taking part in awareness raising. So we really challenge people to think. I can't see my clock, so so apologies, I will try and go through quickly because I'm sure I'm close to my time, but we really want people to think about all the roles of their life and think personally, what is my role in ending men's violence against women? And we particularly challenge men to think through that question. The concept of allyship it has really developed and become much more certain over the last months. We want to make sure everybody's informed and encourage others to be. We want to create a culture where domestic abuse and violence against women is acknowledged and discussed. We need to talk about this, and men need to talk about this. We want people to know that that you are a person who's willing to listen, and you're a man that's willing to listen. And we want to, as I've already said, know where people can go for help and advice, and also if you're concerned about someone else, where you can go and get help and advice in how to manage that situation. So I was slightly late joining everybody because I was trying to get current pictures of what's happened on White Ribbon Day on the 25th of November. So quite a lot of those are current. I love the children in the top right hand corner. You can't see that they've all made white food and white ribbon biscuits, which I thought was fantastic. We had a lot of activity happening in schools. People had talks. Chester are very, very proud that they think they managed to make the biggest white ribbon in the world, and they got engaged with the local fire service to be able to do that with their big crane. This is awareness raising, challenging men taking the opportunity to stand up and make a difference. I think it's helpful to have that focus, but of course that's got to be lasting throughout the whole year, and we need to make sure that happens. I'm going to close just by saying there's been a recent poll which has shown that there has indeed been a shift in men's attitudes in the last year, and that's something that's encouraging and we need to build on. The time, as Anne said, is now. So 35% of men now say they're more likely to help a woman who's in trouble than they feel that they would have done before the events of the last months. more than a quarter say they're likely to walk on the opposite side of a road. I know this was in my don't have a checklist, but and are thinking about that. This is fundamental change. 66% of men agree that ending men's violence against women should be an equal priority to the government. That's a significant number. There are the rest who we need to get on board with that. But this is a moment where men are receptive, want to know how to make a change. And if those 66% there who are with us are talking to their friends who aren't, we can really look to make a difference now and in this generation. So I've covered the next steps. I'm going to whiz down those really quickly. Some things to think about. The most important for us is to focus all those things down onto, let's push out the white ribbon promise. It sounds simple, but it makes a difference. It gives a foundation on which people can work. And I don't know whether I even put, wear a white ribbon. It's a starting point for conversations. We want it to be widely known, but actually if somebody asks you what it means, that's an opening for having a much fuller conversation. I'm sure where to get help will be shared as part of the webinar, but I'll just place these on the screen now, and then they will be in the recording. To emphasise that the domestic violence helpline you can also call that if you're concerned about other people, and the respect helpline is there for people who are concerned about their own behaviour. And where there's help and support there. So thank you very much. And I hope I'm more or less within my time allocation.
Anthea, thank you very much. You are. So that's wonderful. And I'm going to pass on quickly to Dr. Stephen Burrell. So we'll stay within our time. Thank you, Stephen.
Great, thank you very much. And thank you so much for having me. It's a real privilege to be speaking to you because my mum is actually a president of a WI branch. So yeah, it's a real honour for me to be speaking to the WI.
You know what, Stephen? That's what we want to hear.
Brilliant. Yeah, well, hopefully you can see my slides. Yeah, so I'll talk to you about some of the issues which I've kind of covered in my research in relation to this topic. And I suppose the first thing to highlight is, I suppose, what's already been said really is that I think we've seen really over the last year, it's just, really highlighted, with the horrific murders of Sarah Everard and Sabina Nessa, which are of course just some of the many murders of women each year by men, how important it is that, well, first of all, we need to recognize the role men are playing in this violence. The vast majority of violence in general in society is being perpetrated by men, but that also means that, men have a positive role to challenge that and speak out about that. And actually we have a responsibility to do that. This is a men's problem. Ultimately, it's us that are doing this violence. So it has to be us, changing our behavior. That's the only way we can really actually stop this ultimately, which is why the work of White Ribbon, for example, is so important. Yeah, and so I suppose, I just re-emphasize what Anthea said there, that, therefore, I suppose it's really important that we as men, we look to the spaces where we live our lives on a day-to-day basis, and we go into those spaces and we challenge, we speak out about violence against women, why it's unacceptable, but also, as Anthea said, the kind of sexism and misogyny which underpins it, which feeds into it, which we do encounter on a day-to-day basis, all around us, whether that is a sexist joke or, kind of our friends objectifying women, or more broadly in society, media like objectifying women, or kind of perpetuating, sexist ideas, because all of those things continue this idea that we as a society value women less, and that somehow it's okay for men to behave however we want to towards women. And of course, there are some men who are already speaking out about these issues, as Anthea has highlighted. Myself and some colleagues earlier this year, we had a book come out, which is highlighted there in the slide, where we kind of interviewed men who are kind of active in some way in speaking out about violence against women. But I suppose the point is there's not nearly enough of them. It's a very small number of men, and we need so many more men to be doing that, because this is such a huge problem. Yeah, that it, as Anthea said, it requires all men, really to be recognizing our role in this. And I think by doing that, one thing I'd like to talk about today is I think, by men doing that, actually that means, I suppose, thinking about and challenging some of the ideas we have in society about what it means to be a man. And I think actually when men do, speak out about men's violence, actually we are actually bringing into question some of the kind of dominant norms and expectations around masculinity. And I think that's really important because, as I said, most violence in society is perpetrated by men, but that isn't something which is inherent within men. I think too often when we talk about different forms of violence, including, the different forms of violence against women, we often just see it as something which is inevitable. It's always been there. It's always going to be there. All we can do is kind of deal with the kind of consequences of that. And I don't think that's true at all. If we were doing a lot more around prevention of the kind that of work that Anthea was talking about, we could be stopping this from happening. Just look at the fact that a lot of men don't use violence. Violence kind of varies in different societies. That shows that this is something which is coming out of society. It's something which is rooted in, I suppose, how society defines what it means to be a man, as I said. And so I think a key thing that we need to be talking a lot more about, really, is those kind of constructions of masculinity, basically, in society. And if we change what it means to be a man, and if we reduce the kind of widespread influence that quite rigid, restrictive, like gender norms, gender stereotypes have on all of us to some degree, then actually we can prevent violence and abuse in society. And so some of the issues which we picked up on in relation to that in that research I just mentioned, with men already kind of speaking out or being involved in different kinds of anti-violence work, often they said that, when they were growing up, for example, they didn't feel like they fitted in with some of these expectations around masculinity, like be tough, be strong, don't show your emotions. And perhaps therefore was that because perhaps in some cases they were being brought up in an environment where they were able to kind of actually question some of those expectations and live outside of them a bit more. And that then gave them more space to actually think critically about things like men's violence towards women and feel more able to actually to challenge that. So I think that's a really important thing to think about. And another thing which came up there as well was that often actually, of course, it's really important that we men speak to other men, because that's just something we're not doing anywhere near enough currently. Men are just far too silent about this, basically. But interestingly as well, it was often women in those men's lives who had a really big impact on them and kind of convinced them of the need to get involved in activism to end violence against women. So I think that's really important to recognize as well, that women do have a huge impact on the men and boys in their lives, and often that can play a really key role in engaging men on these issues. So I think that is something to recognize and value as well, I suppose. And so if we look at some of the kind of research that exists around, what are some of the kind of dominant ideas and expectations around manhood, being a real man in society today? Because I think that those, we have seen big changes, of course, in recent decades. We've seen more men get involved in fatherhood more actively, for example, and that's a really positive shift. But I think that these expectations are still there, and they're still pretty influential. It's still quite hard to live outside of those things and resist or challenge those things, perhaps especially, when we're young and we're growing up and we've got that pressure to kind of fit in at school, for example. And so there's some research around this idea of the man box, as it were. So the kind of norms and expectations around masculinity, which kind of box men in and which they don't feel able to kind of act outside of. And that kind of showed that for young men, some of the kind of key expectations were around, being self-sufficient, acting tough, looking good in a way, often being quite muscular, for example, fitting in with that idea about being strong. Sticking to rigid gender roles, in the home, for example, that it's still somehow not seen as very manly to do the washing up or do the laundry, even though those are pretty basic and important tasks. Be heterosexual, be homophobic. It's still perhaps seen quite widely that you're not a real man if you're not heterosexual somehow. And I suppose very much connected with that, perhaps there's still a lot of expectations around men, especially young men, displaying their sexual prowess, like boasting to each other about their kind of sexual activities. And perhaps there's that feeds into the idea that then men might kind of, I suppose, the women are perhaps collateral damage sometimes in men trying to prove their masculinity to each other, for example, by harassing women in a nightclub, for example. And lastly, of course, being prepared to use violence. I think still when we bring up boys and young men, there is a lot of kind of expectation there that boys should be prepared to be able to use violence, to defend themselves, for example. If they're being picked on at school and they don't defend themselves, or if somebody is being violent towards them and they don't kind of respond with violence, then somehow that's not being very manly. So perhaps there's even an expectation there that boys and young men, on the one hand, as a society, we say that violence isn't okay, but on the other hand, there is still those expectations in terms of masculinity that boys and young men should be able to use violence. And actually, yeah, if they're not able to do that, or if they don't respond with violence, then they're not kind of successfully living up to those expectations. And I think connected to that, we can see then that oftentimes when men and boys are using violence and abuse, it is perhaps often a way in their minds of trying to kind of prove their masculinity or assert that sense of kind of masculine power and control. I mean, we know that different forms of abuse, like domestic abuse, at the heart of that is coercion and control. And that is very much, I think, connected with these masculine expectations. The idea that we still have, I think, often that somebody can be wearing the trousers in the family in a relationship, and that the idea that should be the man. It should be the man who has more power, who makes most of the decisions, and that can kind of then feed into and legitimize this kind of coercive and controlling behavior, for example, I think. So yeah, if you look at different forms of violence by men, I think we as a society too often still normalize those things and deem them in some circumstances to be kind of acceptable to some extent, or kind of we tolerate it to some extent, and perhaps we even still kind of foster to some degree a sense of entitlement among men, that we have the right to behave however we want to. Boys will be boys. I mean, you just look at like the influence of kind of mainstream pornography and how easily accessible that is for children and young people, and what kind of messages is that giving out about sexuality and like who sex is for, and like what is a kind of normal way to behave within sex, for example. But I think a key thing which I think is important to highlight as well in relation to this, well, first of all, of course, that's a big generalization, what I've just said. Of course, there is quite a lot of variation across different social groups, and age is a big factor there. So perhaps, as men get older, there aren't quite as many of these expectations around fitting in with these ideas about masculinity. But at the same time, I suppose, as we get older, it's hard, perhaps it becomes harder to kind of to resist them and to move outside of them as well. But of course, lots of men do that in all sorts of different ways, but they do still have a big influence on all of us, I think. But also they have a detrimental impact on men ourselves. So for example, ideas that men should take risks. We shouldn't be concerned about our own health and well-being. We should be showing bravado, and that can mean that often men's health does suffer as a result. The idea that men should never show weakness. We shouldn't show our emotions. That can have a big impact on mental health, or just coming to terms with our own vulnerability. As humans, men are often less likely to go to the doctor or to seek help if they are suffering from mental health problems, for example. And it also holds back our capacity to care for others. Perhaps we often don't have as close relationships with family members or children, that which can be hugely rewarding for all of us. But the idea that somehow it's not very manly, to spend lots of time caring for children or other family members, I think has a detrimental impact on men ourselves. And so I think if we do kind of challenge some of these dominant ideas about masculinity, and we open those up and we kind of enable men to be whoever we want to be and not feel like we have to fit with those expectations, then actually that has a huge impact on men and boys ourselves. But of course, also, I suppose creating a more gender equal society therefore benefits everyone, men ourselves, but obviously it benefits women. And I suppose a key thing to highlight is, men should be speaking out about this, not because we will benefit, even though we will, but fundamentally because it is the right thing to do, and we all should be speaking up for a more fair, equal society free from this violence. So yeah, just to conclude then, I suppose one thing to highlight there is I think that all of us can challenge these kinds of gendered expectations which we encounter on a day-to-day basis. I mean, just as an example of that, it's coming up to Christmas, when the kind of children that we might have in our lives, the presents we buy, what kind of presents are we getting for our children at Christmas? Why is it that we still buy toy weapons often for boys, but for girls we'll give them like, dolls and things like that, and we're not perhaps encouraging those kind of caring, nurturing skills to the same degree in boys, which is, I think that's a shame. And that's just one example, of course, and that needs to happen across society. So this isn't just just about individuals, but organizations, companies, need to think about what kind of messages are we giving out with the products we're selling and the advertising we're doing. Are we actually reproducing some of these gender stereotypes? But yeah, fundamentally, I think the most important thing is that we men, look at our own attitudes, our own behaviors, and of course, those of the people around us, and think about how can we create change? How can we actually support each other to do better as men, and to create societies, create workplaces, cultures where violence against women is widely agreed to be unacceptable. I think the pandemic creates kind of new, obviously it creates huge challenges, but it does create new opportunities as well. We have seen more men getting involved in caregiving and fatherhood, for example, because schools have been closed and people have been working from home. We've seen more people getting involved in supporting their local communities. And I think that's really important, again, to challenge some of these ideas that being a man is about being independent and self-sufficient and so on. But yeah, just lastly, I think, again, the pandemic and the events of the last year have just really illustrated we need to be doing so much more in terms of preventing violence against women from happening in the first place, and we all gain from doing that work. And I think we as men in particular need to be doing a lot more, and we just can't stay silent about this anymore, really. Yeah, so thank you very much for listening. Just to highlight, in case anyone listens to podcasts, myself and some colleagues recently started a podcast looking at these issues called Now and Men. But yeah, I'll stop talking for now, and hopefully we can have some time for discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, all three of our speakers. Fascinating. Some I know, some I knew. So thank you very much for all of you. Can I open this to everyone else who's listening? If you have a question, please can you put it in the chat function, and I will call on you or read it out. I'm not sure if I have access to you or not. But while we're waiting for that, to all three of our panelists, could I ask you three a question? Because I've got you here. Can I pick your brains? The WI is often told by decision makers that policymakers listen to us because we've got so many women members. We've got 200,000 women members. Now, I'm fairly new to the role. We've had this campaign for quite some time, and our members, it's very close to our members' hearts. What I've got to decide is how to focus the WI's resources in this campaign. What will do the most good? Is it sort of practical support at grassroots level? Is it policy change? In your mind, I know this is an off the top of your head answer. What should the WI be doing? Commander Sue, do you want to start? Thank you.
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of things you can do. There's quite a lot of legislation that goes through Parliament, and they're always looking for consultation. So particularly around domestic abuse, and there was some other consultation around violence against women and girls in a couple of the new bills. So it's worth looking on the website and actually putting your consultation either as a group or as an individual in. It's really important. In London, we have independent advisory groups in every borough, and we also have safer neighbour boards, and we would welcome colleagues from your institute sitting on those boards, because they can bring in views from other colleagues in the Women's Institute. And what we do is we take the priorities, local priorities, from those safer neighbour boards and from our contacts in the independent advisory groups. So they're worth knowing a bit about, and you can find that on the local police website, or come through me and I can put you in touch.
Commander Sue, if you could send me the link to how we could best direct members, that would be really helpful. Thank you. Because we do have London WIs, people often think, oh, it's just a rural organisation, but it's not. It's growing really fast in the towns. So that would be really helpful.
Okay.
Would Anthea or Stephen like to add anything?
I would just want to back up about being really absolutely involved in consultations. I think sometimes when it's an organisation with a really broad interest, can miss out on being consulted on about specific things. So I think it's making sure that that's there and kept in touch. So focusing on that. Also at local level, buddy up with, particularly with organisations that are supporting people, so local refuges, to have that awareness, but challenge your own workplace. But if you're in a place that's got something such as a very big or even a small football club, for example, which looks as being a really male-dominated environment, why not challenge as the WI and say, how are you going to get involved in this? Can we do this? So imaginative talking there, and I think they would be very receptive to listening. And then power of individuals as well. If you're talking in groups and with institutes as you are, and being aware that that reflects in terms of like thinking about how we can all take individual action. And on my screen about next steps, for example, if you see something horribly sexist or violent in media, or the way that a domestic abuse murder is described, complain and challenge about that. So we have power as an individual voice as well.
Thank you. I really like the idea of challenging sort of male dominated behaviours on a local level. I think that's something we haven't done in the past, and our ladies would be really good at that in the nicest possible way. Stephen, have you got anything you'd like to add?
Well, I think that's a great point by Anthea, because I think ultimately it is us men who need to be changing, isn't it? So anything which puts the onus on us, I think is really important. But also, I suppose maybe around prevention, I think like just we need more prevention work. And so anything, you can do to raise awareness of that and to push for that. And that can be at all different levels in society, right? That's government, but it's also each of us as individuals, the role we can all play in prevention. And maybe as well, just something Anthea said as well around, working with building relationships with like local violence against women support services like refuges and rape crisis centres, because the scandalous thing is that they are still massively underfunded in society, which just shows that how much more work we need to do as a society to take this problem seriously. So yeah, that's what I would say, I guess.
I think on the practical level, I know we have a sort of hierarchy in the WI, as I expect you know, and on a hierarchy level, I think we've done well at supporting our local refugees. I mean, in my county, we provide the most fantastic Christmas presents to people in refuges. So, and have done for a number of years. That side of it, the grassroots practical level, we're doing really well. So I've just got to check that, is there more that we could be doing using our influence as such a big organisation, and an organisation where people trust what we say. I mean, there's plenty of big organizations. I'm not sure you'd necessarily trust them, but we're always told that people trust the WI. I'm not sure if you know, but behind Anne and I, who are volunteers, we have a team of staff, and listening to this call, Anchal has asked me to ask, and I don't know, Anchal, do you want to ask the question yourself? Would you like to ask?
Yeah, thank you, Nikki. Yeah. And again, thank you to all the speakers. I mean, there's been a lot of information that I know that WI members will find really, really helpful, both on an individual level, but also a collective level. And I think really what would be interesting for me is it's about changing the narrative. We speak about violence against women, and the majority of the time, the perpetrator, largely being men, isn't mentioned all the time. So I wondered, how do we, what is it, the language we use? Is it the way we're framing information? How do we change that narrative to really ensure that violence against women is being seen as a shared issue? And I know all the speakers have touched on it. So if there's anything else that can be added to that, thank you.
Who would like to start? Stephen, would you like to start?
Yeah, I can do it. Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I think the way, and I don't mean this is just the WI. Obviously, it's all of us. But the way that we all talk about this, too often we still focus on the women and what could they have been doing differently? How could they change their behaviour? I mean, as you said, even the words we use, like violence against women or domestic abuse, so we so rarely talk about who's actually doing this violence, which I know that's uncomfortable, especially for us men, because we are doing this violence. But the only way we can stop stop it is by looking at who's perpetrating it and why that is. So the more we can put our focus on that, you know, in a positive way, you know, because as I said, I think we as men benefit from these conversations and we have a positive role to play. But yeah, putting more onus on that, more onus on masculinity as the root of the problem, those social constructions of masculinity, and more emphasis on patriarchy, you know, gender inequality, because that is at the heart of this as well. And I think tackling that is also at the source of prevention. Yeah. Thank
you very much. Oh, Commander Sue.
Yeah, I agree. We need to change the narrative, and it's really difficult to change overnight. So, you know, what we're trying to do is small steps. Let's try and change that internally. We know we've had a lot of criticism, so it's about how do we change the cultures, the behaviour, which is why we've opened our door to Baroness Casey to come and have a look, see what we do, but also making it very clear right from the top all the way down, we won't accept poor standards of behaviour, or if you use things on social media, because we acknowledge our younger people, well, not even younger people, I've got a 90-year-old dad that uses social media, so, you know, but just how social media has evolved, and also not being the bystander, as I mentioned. So I think there are ways we can do that, but the narrative and changing the language is a nuance, and I think that will take a little bit of time, but if we all push in the same direction, we're going to get there.
That's a really good way to end. Thank you very much. I'm going to pass on to Anne just for some concluding remarks. Thank you, Anne.
Thank you, Nikki, and thank you to all our panelists. My goodness, we've had plenty to think about this afternoon, haven't we? And although we know about this subject as WI members, we've, as I've said, we've campaigned on it for a number of years. I think what you've brought in this webinar is a sort of freshness of mind thinking to bring it all into more of a focus of what we as members can do to help this situation. Because at the end of the day, we want violence against women eliminated. Now, I know that's a tall order, but as you said, Stephen, if we can persuade men to realize that it isn't a natural thing, men do not need to show violence to each other or to women just to be a strong man, to be caring, compassionate and considerate is equally as important or more important in my book than being this macho man who's out fighting to show his way around. It's almost like being back in the dark ages where man had to be man, so we have a lot of thought from what you've talked about. And Sue, can I say how refreshing it is to hear your honesty about where the Met is on the situation at the moment, because we know you've faced an awful time in the last year or so with some very, very difficult circumstances. But the reality is that we have to face up to difficult circumstances. And the way you're approaching that, to me, gives me a sense of confidence that the future for the Met is going to be much brighter and that respect will come back. We all know that once you lose respect and trust, it's far more difficult to build it back up. But I think you're going about it in the right way. And I think your ideas of engaging society in the discussion is really crucial. The way that you're looking at your community networks and getting community organizations like the WI on board to make the differences and to hear their opinions on not only violence against women, but all policing matters will help you build that confidence back up. I know you've got a lot on your hands, but I feel perfect confidence that we'll get there. And coming on to you, Anthea. Now, the White Ribbon, as Nikki said, is something that I've worked with for over 8 years as chair of the Wales WIs. I first got to hear of it in 2013, and the organisation has grown in strength and strength from those early days. In the last 8 years, it's developed terrifically, both here in the UK, but also internationally. I happen to follow White Ribbon Australia, where they have a huge problem with violence against women. And I think, going back to Stephen's point, this macho image of Australian men probably doesn't help that either. So we really appreciate the work that you do on it. We can never forget that between 120 and 150 women die a year at the hands of a man. You know, whatever else we think of today, if we can go from here knowing that we have to get that figure down to 0 or near 0 before we say that we've actually achieved anything. So thank you for your time, and to the members out there, please use your voice to make sure that this campaign is one where in a few years we'll be saying, well, we've done that. It's not such a huge problem anymore. But keep up your good work with supporting the refugees, not just at Christmas and high days and holidays, but throughout the year, because the need is throughout the year. We know that often when football matches have gone the wrong way, or in Wales, the rugby matches and internationals in particular, when Wales have lost, violence against women increases. So it's a year-round thing, not just Christmas, and it's not just during the pandemic, although that has made it worse. So keep your support going. And if you can get involved in the surveys and the consultations on legislation, then please do. But again, thank you to all three of our panelists, Commander Sue, Anthea and Dr. Stephen Burrell, and Nikki for chairing this session. And I hope as members, you've enjoyed this afternoon. If enjoy is probably the wrong word, but actually we've gained a lot of information and a strength to go out there and make a difference. I think I'm going to finish with the words of Stephen, who said that the only way to stop men's violence is for men to change their behavior. And I think that's up to us as women to make sure that we help men to change their behavior. Thank you all very much.